we in. We coolin' for the weekend. Drop the top and then we out. We do this every season. Sunshades on a sunny day. Doing 80 and we switching lanes. Just keep it cool and chillin' with the bae. Don't call my phone, I hear what you say. Or what you say. We ain't gotta keep this on the low. Don't do it fast, we can take it slow.
Hey guys, what's up? It's your boy Trix. Today we're going to be doing another Java video on Spark and databases. I know I said I was going to do the Docker one, but the Docker one is literally just you take your JVM parameters and you chuck it in to the Docker build image, and then it will build your image for you and then you can run it, which isn't that interesting, all things considered. I do recommend checking it out if you've never used Docker and Java before, just as like a template, but most of the time you can just like Google Java Docker Compose and you'll get to the same result. Yeah, Java Docker Compose, then build your first Java image. You just build a Docker file, looks something like this. This is for Spring Boot obviously, but you can just change that to the build parameters for Spark. Then you build and it does it for you. So it's not really that fancy. It's pretty much the same thing in the Spark one. So if you've never done it before, it will be cool. Give it a shot, but it's not that complicated to look at. It's just one file and it's not really that, to me, it's not that interesting. So I just skipped it because I've already seen stuff like that work. If you've never used it before, again, please check it out. It's pretty cool. It just means that instead of you needing to like install the JVM on a machine, like on bare metal, making sure that you have the right Java version installed and everything, you can just package that with your Docker image. So all you need to do is just make sure that that machine has Docker installed, and then it will just pull the most common one that everybody builds off of is like Alpine Linux or something. It pulls down your Alpine Linux image, installs the dependency that you need to run your application, and then just builds your application on top, so you can ship it anywhere. It's a lot like the JVM, where you can just take your bytecode and run it on any machine, as long as the JVM is installed in some degree. But it just makes it that your code can now run on anything in a container, so it doesn't need to have access to the bare metal on the system. So it's a lot nicer and a lot. I prefer running Docker and running Java that way, just because it doesn't mean you have to make sure that you have the right Java version installed, and you can just pre-package everything and not have to worry about someone trying to like reverse it to get your code back. Obviously, if someone wanted to, with enough effort, they could, but it just takes a bit of effort. Like everything else, it takes a bit of effort. Again, highly recommend it. For context, Hibernate is very popular in Spring. So if you saw it, you'll probably see like JDBC or Hibernate or like H2 in Spring, which is basically like a Hibernate ORM. This is going to be using Sql2o. For, I also realize that some people might not know what an ORM is. It's an object relational map. Object relational model. So let's say, for example, a popular example of this actually is like in Django. If you've ever done Django in Python, where you can represent your database with classes in Python to say to map the fields, attributes, and the methods that you want to have on that database object, on that table, row, or whatever. An ORM is basically that. So you're just mapping your data to classes in your programming language. That's all. What kind of database library should we use? There are different approaches out there with pros and cons. Object relational mappers approach. Mappers, models, pretty much the same thing. Pure SQL approach. My about this in Sql2o. The basic idea is that ORMs abstract the database and provide classes representing our tables. They tend to be database independent, and that means you could use the same code to integrate with MySQL or PostgreSQL database. Generates SQL code for you in pure SQL approach. Instead, basically, we write the SQL code and wrap each query in a function. While the idea for an abstracting the details is always tempting, the problem is that mapping a relational database into a object-oriented schema only works up to a certain point. Yep, abstraction tends to be leaky because you end up needing to do things that make perfect sense in a relational schema, but do not fit into object-oriented abstraction. That's very common when you have classes that depend on each other, but in like SQL or something, in an SQL schema, the objects might be like a one way or two, or a one to one, one to many, many to many, right? That can be represented with an ORM, right? With object that classifies all of the fields on there, but the mappings won't be exactly the same. So like with a 1-to-1, it will just be that this class is dependent on this class, and they both take each other, or like they both can be used with each other, right? But then with a one-to-many, it would be like one class may have like a list or whatever to represent that many relationship back to that first class, but the way you would represent that many would be different depending on how you implement it, which in this kind of summates, right? Because a one-to-many and like a many-to-many is a very in SQL is very simple to understand, because you just have like multiple classes related to multiple classes. Actual implementation is kind of is very different depending on how you want to be accessing those many objects. For this last bit, what they're talking about is very common. So like in Django, I remember if you wanted to do like simple get, update, delete, and search queries, very easy to do with Django, because on that model you can do it very easily, right? You can just call the class that you want and just say, hey, I want to get this, right? But if you want to do like a complex SQL query, most of the time you would just call a raw query, you would just call like .raw query or something, and then manually type in the SQL you want to get. And obviously that's going to be a lot slower, because it's trying to skip all of your object mappings and then do it. It is not the best way to do it. I wonder how they do it in Spark. Yeah, consist in writing your own SQL. Yeah. 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 So basically, what this bit is yes, maintaining. To get started with ORMs, very easy, very simple. As soon as you start adding data to your table, adding things is easy, but then making those relations afterwards a little bit more complex. And then when you start doing like complicated queries with joins, filters, groups, stuff like that, where like basically you're just writing, at that point you're basically just writing raw SQL, and you can put that into an object and like represent that with an object. But if you're only going to be querying it like once in a while, there's no real point, because you're just wasting effort on it. And then if you're getting to that stage already, maybe you just might want to refactor your code base or your database so that it will be easier to query with your ORM, right? Like lots of people even will go down like one route or the other. They'll either have a ton of raw SQL queries because they just don't want to bother refactoring their database, because mapping that back to an ORM is going to involve them having to rewrite everything anyway, or they just rewrite it anyway because they don't want to have that tech debt down the line, and eventually that I don't want to say it will always happen if you know what data you're going to be having, and it will always stay the same, but no code base is always like complete and feature complete forever. Like you will always be asked to implement a new feature or do something else, or do something that, or just do something new, right? And there's no guarantee that it's always going to be the same, or they're always going to use it. So most of the time people might just like refactor their whole ORM. That's why most of the time, again, you'll either see people just writing the raw SQL queries because they don't want to refactor, or they'll just spend time refactoring in case they need to do it, and in case they have a bigger ask in the future that asks them to refactor again, because if they're already refactoring, they might as well just keep refactoring. And if you refactored once, refactoring again isn't going to be that complicated anyway. There isn't a right or wrong way to do it. Yeah, with ORMs, it can be a performance hit. One, because it's mapping your objects on the fly. So what an ORM does is it maps your query to, it tries to map your database directly to, it tries to map your database schema directly to the objects that you're defining. And then technically, the way that Django did it, which I think is how it done it, I haven't looked at the internals of the ORM that Django used, but what I think it did, and why Django is like, and like Python is just slow in general, is because it doesn't get all of the data immediately, right? Because your database could update. So what happens is you've already defined the schema in your ORM in your code, but it doesn't actually apply that until you make a query. So when you make a query to your database, it then says, hey, database, map everything to this object related mapping, like your classes that you are specifying for your data, and then call a query on it. I might be wrong on that, but I think that's how it does it, and that's quite slow. I don't know if I'm going to start coding this. Just because I don't want to run, but I don't want to install Postgres right now. Like, Postgres is going to take a while to install. Are they using any... That's gonna have to be... Basically, what I'm thinking right now is I might not need to install Postgres, but I could install a different database, but the thing about Postgres is lots of people like using it because it has lots of types, and the types are just sane, right? But they don't map to other databases nicely. So like if you go from Postgres to MySQL will, how long have I've been, yeah, MySQL in, I'm trying not to swear because I've come to the realization from like some other YouTubers that I've been watching that if you swear too early in a live stream or video, your stream or video will not get promoted as much, and that's just a YouTube algorithm thing. So I'm trying very hard not to swear right now, but if you try to, and so essentially if you try to map these to like MySQL will throw a syntax exception. Not a syntax exception, but it will say that the variable you're trying to define isn't found, or that the type doesn't exist and stuff like that, because Postgres has like the most amount of types that you can have accessible for a database, but MySQL is like the most backwards compatible. So like if you want backwards compatibility, MySQL is the way to go. If you want to have custom types and everything, and you want to be able to, and you know the types that you want to need, and you know the amount of data you want to occupy, go with Postgres. I'd understand why they would want to do UUIDs for posts, just because if you do have a post, you wouldn't want someone to be able to automatically increment between each of the posts. But also, it wouldn't really matter if your slug on your URL is different all the time. Like, the only reason I would expect they're doing this is because when you have a URL or something, if they make a request to the URL, they don't have to map a custom slug. They could just chuck in the post UUID and it'll give them the post in the browser. But then, like, I just remember in Django you could make custom slugs so that you don't have to have that nonsense that it will just auto increment for you. It might just be like a Java thing to that doesn't exist in the Spark and Spring frameworks, maybe. Don't know. To be fair, Django was very nice last time I used it. Yeah. Oh, is this using Lombok? No, it's not using Lombok. Interesting. It's using a data annotation. I thought this would be using Lombok. Unless the annotation is coming straight from Sql2o or Postgres. Yeah, if you've done any database programming, you'll just understand what this is. This is just trying to make a connection in your try so that if an exception is thrown, it immediately disconnects your connection. It generates a UUID, makes a query. This is your SQL that you're writing. Oh, they're using that's and then these are just the parameters that you're mapping between here. So this is saying insert into this post database with these field names, and then your values are here, and these values are populated by these parameters. So post UID here, it just gets replaced with this, and then execute update, and then categories for each, and then does the same thing here, and then create comment, literally the same thing. List. This is just a get request, isn't it? Yeah, select all from post. Fair enough. Get, select category from where, and then a filter. Select all from web, same thing. Select all from. Yeah, that's literally why you would use a try inside of the why instead of writing try and then open squiggly brackets and then the thing, so that if your connection does fail or like you're finished with that try block, it will close it immediately. It's a nice way to do it. Like if you use Sonarlint, if you have it enabled in your IDE, it'll tell you to do something similar as well, just because it makes things a lot nicer. That if something were to throw an exception, it'll throw it immediately and then stop executing your code. Then again, if it did throw an exception and you still had code to execute because you're not dependent on that that try block anymore, you might find it annoying, but it's good practice to do it though. It is good practice. It just depends on your preference, I'm guessing. Yeah. UUIDs are sick. The implementation in Java is very booky though. Like, so this is a little bit of backstory of what I've done at work, right? It's not a secret, right? Like I've touched UUIDs at work. I pretty much think anybody has touched UUIDs before, right? And like there was a thing with UUIDs that it's just something that I noticed when working with your UUIDs, right? Like you could have a UUID and you could make a UUID from string, a new UUID, or from bytes, right? So let's say you make a new UUID, yeah, UUID.random in Java. If you convert it to bytes, right? So you just convert that UUID to a string and then get the byte array of it, right? Let's say you put that into UUID.fromBytes. You would expect that the UUID that it would return will be the same UUID that you made randomly, right? That would be incorrect. It does not make the same UUID from bytes, from what I remember. It generates a new UUID based on the byte information of that new string. So what would happen is you have your UUID, right? Converting it to a string changes the byte format of that UUID because now it's in a string representation, so it has extra bytes in that string. And then when you convert from that string to a byte array, the byte array of that string is not the same as a byte array of an integer. So when you convert UUID.fromBytes for both of them, for a normal UUID and a UUID that was converted to a string, the one from a string would be different to the one from that was an integer. Obviously, I just did not know that. Interesting. Object mapper, nice. It's just mapping the HTTP response, I'm guessing. Yes, request. Again, actually I haven't said this. You could just use a record for this, but object mapper is okay too. Because technically all object mapper is doing is just saying map this request body to this new post payload based on this mapping, right? And most of the time it'll just be like a JSON map or something. So it just maps it and then does something with it, right? So it'll go into new post payload, which is just this creation, right? And then from this creation, you just get title, get content, and get whatever. I'm hoping, actually, that new post payload is a record, or it's Java 8. I don't think Java 8 has records, actually. Mm-hmm. Did it insert any data into here? No, it didn't. So yeah, even if I did, it wouldn't work because I don't have the data and the database that they're using. Oh, unless I was to make her up. Nah, it still wouldn't work. It's still cool to know that you can. Yeah, it just gets you the UID and the comments associated with it. Yeah, I think this one was pretty good. If you can get it running, and see. Sorry about that. And see how you get on. I think this one's a lot nicer. What I reckon, I'm gonna do the who, what, when, where, why, how for my review of this. So, who is this for? If you've never done SQL before, if you've never used databases before, and never used RMs, I highly recommend this. Just because it had to do touching a little bit of everything, and it's showing you the raw SQL queries I was making as well to the database, which is basically here, right? I'm done here. What? When? Yeah, where? Where would it be useful? Why is it useful? Would I recommend this to someone else? I would recommend it to the people, yeah, definitely. I think it's pretty decent. It would have been nice to see them, like, I'm guessing there is technically an endpoint, and you could just make an endpoint for like these are post requests, right? So you could make an endpoint. So you could just access one of these post requests and then just say that, oh, you want to specify the data that you want to put into the database, right? So I can't really fault them on that. It's just, I wish this was just a little more verbose, if that makes sense. What went well? I've talked about. I think it's pretty. It touches on lots of things. I think it'll be pretty good for people that have never touched on these things before. Highly recommend this. It could be better if it did touch on like inserting data in there, setting up the database properly instead of just, oh yeah, you can just run it in a Docker container. Like obviously I know, like lots of people will know how to pull down a Docker image, run a Docker image without, what's the word? Run a Docker image in the background and then connect to it by just Docker PS, get the ports of the container and then just plug it into your application where it has the port mappings. Where is it? It is down here. DB host and DB username password. You just put all of these in based on the stuff you have from your database that you're plugging in. Just wish they went into a bit more detail. I know this is just a tutorial, right? So it doesn't need to touch on everything. But it would have been nice just because then I could follow along a little bit more and like I'd actually run it on mine for myself on local. Yeah. Ooh, I did not read this before. I do agree with this though. So okay, if I can I get to the top? Okay. So in terms of even better if, that's one of them, right? If they could just be a bit more verbose and like explain how you can go from nothing all the way to end product, right? That would have been nice. Also, because that comment just mentioned it, this is technically not production ready code. And that is pure, all the other code is fine. It is purely because of this bit here. And that is because you are loading in your details to log in based on command line arguments. I know lots of people might not find that like, if you're running this from a Docker compose, right? Probably not that big a deal because you could just execute your Java build like nbn run like this, right? You could just execute this and it will do it for you. But it would be nice if you could just load it from config, like applications.com for settings.xml or something. Because in production ready code, you do not want, like if you do a rebuild or a restart, right? If you stop a Java image, if you stop it, right, and it's not in a Docker container and it doesn't have those build parameters here, when you try to run it again, it's not going to connect. But if you're making it load from a file, you'll always have those values. It just means that you're going to have to load those values correctly. You can use something like a shared secrets data store like Vault or something to load in the data, load in the secret keys for the database connection. Or you could just, if you're running it in a Docker container, specify that specify these parameters in your Docker compose, and then give access to your Java application and put it on the same network as your database on like the host network or something, or on a custom network, and then just let them run both so that you can both at the same time, and then they can communicate with each other. Again, that's not production ready, it would have been nice if it was, but it's understandable. Like, this is just a tutorial. No one's expecting like production ready code from a tutorial. But it would be nice to know that, oh, they could mention it. Like, and that's probably why at the end they say that, oh, this, you can do a lot of other things. The test cases and stuff, I don't really mind, because if you want to run test cases or like implement test cases, you can do them for yourself. And this isn't a testing tutorial, it's about how to get up and running with Sql2o. But yeah, I genuinely recommend this. Next time we are going to cover exposing HTML and JSON from Spark service. Oh, it's another short one. These Spark ones are short, you know. Well, we're gonna give it a shot. It is very short though. I don't know if I like that, because like, even though it's short, there is a lot of detail that is going over, but it's just so short. I want it to like go over a bit more. I'm gonna be very happy when we get to the Jetty one, because Jetty is just Java Netty, right? It's just a Netty is just built on top of Netty. It's going to be beautiful. I love Netty, like genuinely. Netty's like a really sick network. Netty is a really sick Java asynchronous library, right? It's just, I've said this before, documentation can be a little arse. Not all documentation is. It's just like, I remember I was looking at some Netty stuff and I found the only place I found like decent documentation on this one class was like from a Chinese blog from like 2017 or something, and it's 2023. Like, I know lots of people aren't going to be playing with that just because it's just a class that you only really care about if you're trying to do something, like if you're trying to optimize it for your use case, right? But it would still be nice to know that the Netty team cares enough to be like, hey, these are what these do, this is how this works, instead of me trying to figure it out myself. Otherwise, anyway, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, enjoy the rest of your day, and peace.